Afternoon, everybody. I suppose as Mayor, it's my job officially to welcome you all to Greater Manchester, a place so warm, so welcoming, so open-minded. It even elected somebody born in Liverpool as its first mayor, which says something really quite special, I think, about the people here. As Louise just mentioned, I was a cabinet minister once upon a time, and I hope you can all hear me when the planes are coming in. I'll just tell you something about what happened when I was Culture Secretary, because it kind of tells you about the mindset of the Greater Manchester mindset. It was 2008, and we were building up to the London 2012 Olympics. And Visit England came to me and said, we want to commission some research about how the country sees itself, and in particular, where people feel is the second city of the UK. So I said, oh, fine. So they went off and did this research, and then they came back to present the findings. What it said was, in London, when people were asked that question, what do you think is the second city? 50% of people said Birmingham and 50% said Manchester. And then when they went to Liverpool and asked the same question, 60% of people there said Manchester, 40% said Birmingham. Then they went to Birmingham and asked the same question. And there, 80% of people said Birmingham, 20% said Manchester. Then they came here and asked that question, what is the second city of the UK? And 90% of people said London. So, you know, modesty is probably not the kind of the cheap. We've got many other virtues, but probably that's not one of them. But I am incredibly privileged to be the first elected mayor of Greater Manchester, because the way I look at it, it's a chance actually to build a new way of doing politics from the ground up, and doing it in a different way than we've done before. I was in Westminster for 16 years, and I spent most of my time there trying to speak up for the northwest of England. But as you'll all know, it's a pretty London-centric culture down there, and it was tough. It's tough to get heard in that system. And also, you'll all know that down there, with the two sets of benches facing each other, the point scoring sort of takes over everything else, and it's all about that tit for tat and all the rest of it. And often big issues get neglected. And again, you know, when you've been there for a while, that, believe it or not, really frustrates you. And I can kind of see that more clearly now, having left that world behind. But the big point I wanted to start by making to you is, we've got a very over-centralized political system in this country. And the trouble with it is, one perspective on life tries to kind of form policies for everywhere, and it just doesn't work. So take industry policy as an example to start off with. Back in the 80s and 90s, large parts of Greater Manchester needed help with making the transition from the very old industries to the new economy. But obviously that wasn't there. The talk nationally was all about the service economy, the knowledge economy, I think, as it was called back then. And consequently, some areas were just left, and the country didn't have a good industrial policy to help those areas. Or go to education policy. As long as I was in Westminster, and this is true under governments of both colours, the obsession was on the university route. So all education policy seemed to be geared towards the university route, and really neglected technical education and technical qualifications, again, to our cost. And I think we do feel that very much in a place like Greater Manchester. But let me give you a third example, and you'll have strong feelings about this because it's your world, housing. The same thing. There was a mentality that everybody would be an owner-occupier, and that drove housing policy in the UK, or has driven it, I would say, since the 80s. And the reality is that was never going to be the case, in the same way that everybody wasn't going to go to university. But it's left us with a dysfunctional housing market. And I think where we're coming from now with devolution, it's a chance to let some new thinking in, to rebuild better solutions from the bottom up. Because we're quite clear, or I'm quite clear anyway, that old way of doing one policy for the whole country in that top-down way hasn't worked, basically. It's given us a housing crisis. It's left too many young people without hope. And we haven't had an industrial policy that served us well. So devolution is a real opportunity to bring through some new thinking. And actually, from my point of view, you know, having kind of sat on those green benches for 16 years, I feel quite liberated, actually, if I'm honest with you, leaving it behind. You know, I know you get frustrated with the point scoring, but all I can say to you is, as an MP, it's kind of a strange place to work. You know, if you're just sitting there staring at the enemy all day, and that's what it's like. It's a strange environment. You know, if you sit there all day, I'll promise you, looking at Boris Johnson, it does something to you. You know, you kind of, you know, you get by the end of it, you're feeling a bit, you know, wanting to lash out maybe. But that's the way it works. And the way I look at it, having left that world behind, truly, for me now, it's place first and party, well, wherever, second, third. It's all about the place. It's all about the people. It's all about working with business, working with people of all political backgrounds to try and create something better, something that works better for you. You know, it's not as frustrating as what we get down there, more practical, more in the real world. And that's what we're all about. And as I say, in housing particularly, which I would say is right up there for me, transport and housing, the two biggest issues, challenges I face or have kind of realized that I'm facing in my first year. The opportunity to do things a bit differently is long overdue, and we need obviously to use this moment to see if we can drive some of that change from the bottom up. You know, I was never a housing minister, but when I think about the way the housing debate has been conducted nationally, there is all the focus on owner occupation, but also it's quite a kind of numerical debate. You always hear ministers say, we want to build X thousand new houses every year. Well, that's fine, you can do that, but you may not solve the housing crisis, because just simply building numbers of new homes doesn't necessarily mean that everybody will be able to find something that they can afford. What we need is a housing policy that is about solving the housing crisis. And they're two different things, housing policies to build more homes or housing policies to solve the housing crisis. They are two very separate things. But here's another way in which we can make change. Housing policy nationally feels to me to be in quite a silo. You know, it's quite stuck in its own little kind of world. Whereas here at the Greater Manchester level, we've got the opportunity to link housing with health policy, for instance, and think about how we support older people in the home in a very different way. And I think that is quite exciting. But I think we've also got to start talking differently about housing. Here's something I would want to put to you today, and it's very much reflected in the Greater Manchester strategy that we've published. We believe here we need to start talking about housing as a human right. Safe, decent housing should be a human right, in my view, in the same way that access to good healthcare or education is a human right. People should have a right to a roof over their head, I think. And in this day and age, we should be able to achieve it for everybody. I don't think we should have people sleeping on the cold streets in 2018. I just don't think it's right. You know, it's a basic human need, as is healthcare and education. And we need to be thinking of it in that way, and then providing something for everybody that caters for that basic human need. To have, as we've read in the newspapers yesterday, people dying on the streets of Britain in 2018 because of a lack of shelter is a terrible state of affairs. And I've made a commitment here that we will work to end rough sleeping in Greater Manchester by 2020. And the way I'm doing that is not just throwing taxpayers' money at it. I'm trying to unlock the contribution of all sectors, public, private, voluntary, faith, everybody, a whole society approach to tackling homelessness. So you can see how we're beginning to bring some new thinking through. But that then brings me very directly to the private rented sector. Because when I've been looking in more detail around homelessness in the last year and really getting underneath the issues, the truth of the matter is eviction from private rented accommodation is now the single biggest cause of homelessness in Greater Manchester. And I would say, and I'm going to be challenging here, but that's the point of an event like this, it seems to me. I think there are some in your sector who are letting down the reputation of the majority. The fact that you're here today, the fact that you're affiliated to this organisation tells me that you care, that you have a regard for what you do, you want to be the best you can be, you want the whole sector to be viewed in a certain way, you want to be reputable in the way that you work. And it's brilliant, and I want to work with you, and it's why I wanted to have this conversation with you today. But the truth of the matter is that doesn't apply to all of your sector. In Greater Manchester, according to the figures that I've been given, 4 in every 10 homes in the private rented sector are beneath the decent homes standard. Now, the Manchester Evening News, I don't know if you've read it in the last couple of days, but they just did a report on Manchester's what they called hidden slums. Some of the temporary accommodation that is being used to house people, families or people who need to be supported away from the streets is shocking, absolutely appalling. I've seen it myself. One example of a house where they'd had a fire, this is in Gorton, I saw it, where there was a hole, the fire had burnt the roof, but it was still housing people inside. They'd never fixed the roof. One example, but you could read the MEN and you could find many more examples of just appalling failure to protect the people inside. And I just don't think we can't accept that. You shouldn't accept it. You shouldn't accept the fact that 4 in 10 properties in your sector are beneath a decent and safe standard. Grenfell, think about that and everything that means. As a country, can we just accept that it's, as long as there's a roof over your head, you can provide accommodation of any standard, irrespective of its safety? Well, no, we can't accept that. I'm not going to accept that for the people of Greater Manchester. As I say, I want decent, safe, affordable housing for every single person in Greater Manchester, and that is where we're going to be working to achieve. And I just think we're going to have a different conversation with people, but actually isolate those who are getting this sector a bad name. So it's why we're beginning to talk in Greater Manchester of a GM Good Landlord scheme. We're actually doing the same with employers. We're looking at a good employers scheme to start to bring together the majority who are reputable and want to do the right thing, to put some standards down about both work and housing. Because I think that is one of the big reasons why we have so many people sleeping rough on the streets, not just here, but across the country. Things have changed since when I was growing up here in the 1980s. My dad wasn't in well-paid work, but his job was pretty secure, and our home was pretty secure as a result of that. The truth is now, lots of people in Greater Manchester are living with the kind of lethal combination of insecure work and insecure housing. So they don't have certainty over how many hours they're going to work from one week to the next, and therefore how much they're going to earn. And if they're in a situation where the landlord doesn't care whether they're here or there and is going to drop them a letter at the drop of a hat kicking them out, well, people are closer to the streets in that world, aren't they? People are living closer to the edge. So we have to do something, in my view, to raise standards, security for people. We've got an epidemic of insecurity in modern society, and we need to do something to improve the standards of people's work and also improve the standards of their housing. And one of the big things I wanted to say to all members of the Residential Landlords Association today was work with us on that. We will write it with you. We won't do it to you. That's not the way we work in Greater Manchester. With the employers, we're beginning to write what should a good employment charter look like. And we're working with people to draw it. But we want to do the same with you. What's reasonable? What's fair when it comes to what landlords should be expected to provide? Help us get it right. And having got it right, we think it'll be good for you, because then if people can say that they're a GM good landlord, then the public will have more knowledge about where they can go and who perhaps they should avoid. And we will be clearer about saying, well, we're not going to use landlords who won't sign up to that when it comes to public funding for use of landlords. So it'll just bring some clarity to the whole sector. But alongside that, what I also am thinking of doing, and it's just an idea, but I think we need to give those who aren't prepared to play by those rules an opportunity to get out. I'm thinking of whether or not we could have an amnesty for private landlords in Greater Manchester who perhaps don't live here, who don't really care about what goes on here, They just have a property that they don't particularly focus on or maintain, that doesn't look after their tenants very well, but actually can drag whole communities down. I could take you to my former constituency in Leigh, where terraced houses were bought up in the 1990s when the big industry left. And actually they've changed hands many times, and the people who own those properties now don't have any regard or any connection with Leigh. They just want to carry on using it to bring money in. I personally don't think that's acceptable. Landlords are part of the neighbourhood. They have to have a regard for the other people who live in those streets. And I think it's important to be able to say to people, look, if you're not prepared to be a good citizen in Greater Manchester, we just don't want you here. So if you're not going to invest in your property, if you're not going to bring it up to decent home standards, we'd rather you just left. And we will buy out your property. We'll have this amnesty where we take it from you, and then you can go and do something elsewhere. That's the way we want to approach things here. And actually, we feel that if you work with us, this can help the private rented sector kind of from the bottom up sort of build a stronger, if you like, kind of public reputation. Because, as I say, at the moment it's being dragged down by the unscrupulous absent landlords who quite clearly don't care enough. So this is a flavour of where our thinking is up to. Manchester City Council are talking about introducing a renters' charter to support the GM Good Landlord scheme. We are thinking about how we get these things right. We're ready actually to use more of our powers of intervention through the fire service or wherever to ensure we raise standards of accommodation here. We raise safety standards particularly. But we want to do it with you rather than to you. And we want your help in seeing if we can make this all make sense. So that was really what I wanted to say to you today, to kind of offer you that open invitation. And for those of you who say, well, can you really do it? Can you really drive change in that way? Well, I think, think of the city that you're in. It's got a proud tradition of making social change happen from the bottom up. This year is 100 years of the suffragette movement, which was founded here, 150 years of the trade unions. This city has always had that status of being at the forefront in calling for social change for the better. And it's a tradition that people here kind of hold to very much. At the top of the agenda of the Manchester Evening News every day is housing. People are crying out now for change. And I think my invitation to you today is let's be part of that change together. Let's see if we can create something better at the Greater Manchester level, because that then may be able to be replicated across the country. I think the time is now for this conversation and this debate, and if we work together, the chances are we'll get it right. So thanks very much for listening. More than happy, Louise, to take any questions that colleagues have got.
Thank you very much indeed. Yes, look, and thank you very much.